Hello, Ken.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for coming by.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad we could finally connect and after all our journeys kind of in parallel, I think, and then paths not crossing. So
Yeah.
how long have you guys been in business? Like give me the origin story here. I'm curious where the seeds were planted.
Yeah. So I've been with the company 3 years,
Hmm.
but the company has been around much longer than that. The founder, who's now the CTO, Emil, he started this company back in 2016. Actually, I think the first GitHub commit that he made was like I think maybe September, October of 2015. And
Yeah.
then shortly thereafter, like it took off, and then he started a company, got seed funding, and all of this started in France.
Yeah, nice. And I think this will intersect with kind of why we connected around gateways was um it started coming up on my radar because I was riding that first API management wave with three scale mastery, Apogee, and then that all the acquisitions occurred. MuleSoft was still kind of chugging along, and then Kong did their little switch, and I was working with the Tyke folks, and then you guys came along and kind of just steadily rising up and showing up on the radar regularly and regularly, but I never kind of put you into that core bundle, our grandfathers. So that old school wave of API management or the new wave of API management that I always put Kong and Tyke in because I always saw you guys at that time, 2018, 19, 20 was like kind of bleeding edge. But then for me, like at Postman, we were perpetually trying to answer, should we have a gateway? Should we build or buy a gateway? Like we wanted to be that grown up tool. And
Yeah.
you guys were kind of, I think, that vision of the future, at least as I saw it, as far as like where things were going. So in that sense, like I would love to hear your view, like from the top, like what is a gateway? What are you guys trying to accomplish? Like and what's the state of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's start with, like you said, what is a gateway? And I think everybody probably understands what a gateway is, whether it's a physical or virtual, but let's ask the question, what is the need? What is the purpose of a gateway? And the way we kind of look at this is the core job of a gateway is governance. And it's really runtime governance to be more specific. And what do I mean by that? If you kind of unpack the word governance, which I think can be a buzzword, but I was at NVIDIA GTC this week, and I mean this is taking up, and we can talk more about that. But governance as a gateway and as a runtime governance, there's three characteristics. It has to be able to write policies at a granular level. It has to then be able to enforce those policies at runtime. And then it needs to be able to observe the policies to understand what actually happened. So if you maybe zoom out a little bit from that fundamental kind of definition, what a gateway is doing, it's routing, it's securing, and it's observing. And it needs to be able to do that very, very well. And now if you put the microservices layer, because it all depends on the environment in which the gateway is now doing that job. We started in a more VM-centric world where there was a need for such a gateway. Then we shifted to a microservices world, let's say with Kubernetes, where the gateway had to provide that role. But now we are starting to see other things emerge in the microservices ecosystem with AI and MCP workloads entering the enterprise. So now the job of the gateway has not changed. Fundamentally, it's the same definition, right? It is governance. But the things you govern and how you govern is evolving. And we at Traefik Labs is evolving with it because we believe the gateway is a critical point. It's a critical building block. It's mission critical because everything is flowing through in and out. So it needs to be more intelligent on the things that are flowing in and out of the gateway. Because if you are not intelligent, then you're not going to be able to provide governance at a granular level. And so this has kind of been the work that we've been doing over the past 2 years at least, with AI and MCP kind of entering the workforce, is how does a gateway evolve to be able to do that without having to require different gateways, one for AI, one for MCP, one for API, and so forth, because then that doesn't solve anything. That just creates more fragmentation. So, and this is the part we always kind of come back to is solve from the user perspective. Look at it from a day two ops perspective. How is a DevOps team and a platform team going to deploy this gateway? What are they going to expect from the gateway? What is the operating model? Is it UI ops or is it GitOps? These are the kind of questions and answers that we kind of go through and what we're providing to the market.
Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, this gets at what I wanted because I was kind of responding to, I mean, something that's pretty well established, an API gateway, kind of shape shifting. We've got it. We have data gateways, we have an event gateway, and then as I saw, AI gateway, and kind of. And would you say these responses, I mean, these are just different groupings of policies and different needs. Are those naming, is that like investor driven, market driven, sales driven? Like, are they necessary? Can we, is it because gateway's been done and people don't want to do old things, they only want to do new things, so we got to call it something new? Like, why are we seeing this?
I guess you're touching on a very, I would say, a very key topic, which is this recent emergence of a lot of MCP proxies or AI proxies and a lot of new startups that are emerging. I think it's a two-sided thing. There's, in an ecosystem, you always have kind of, you have the investors that are funding these startups, but then you also have kind of the market that is emerging with these new capabilities. And then you have companies that are starting up very, very specialized on addressing these capabilities. And as long as you're going to have those two sides, you're going to continue to see more and more solutions in the market. I mean, it's just nature of venture, it's the nature of how markets kind of evolve. Keeping that aside, like, is this needed? Um, from our standpoint, as you kind of pointed out, companies have already deployed API gateways. It's fair to say, by and large, API gateways are a de facto building block, let's say in a microservices architecture. So, what really drives the need to have additional gateways put into that same architecture? And I think it really comes down to not all gateways are equal. Not all gateways are designed architecturally to evolve, to incorporate these additional capabilities. And I'm not going to name any names here, but I think we all know some gateways were built pre-cloud native era, and they have just tried to kind of stitch things together to hold up in this era. And others, like us, are more modern, where we have built with a very modular architecture to begin with. So it just depends on where you are and what you have deployed. Some gateways are going to evolve to be able to handle the new tasks, and others won't. Um, the way we kind of look at it, going back to what I said earlier, is day two ops. Will the customer benefit from having a specialized API gateway, a specialized AI gateway, and a specialized MCP gateway from three different vendors in their stack? We think that's a highly unoptimized scenario. And what we have done at Traefik specifically is built this with the architecture in mind that it's a gateway. It's a cloud native, Kubernetes native gateway. It has all the right primitives to allow for different protocols to coexist, whether it's a standard API gateway, which is using a REST protocol, or it's a AI gateway, which also happens to use the REST protocol, but it has some additional nuances around it, or it's MCP, which is a different protocol that it can handle. So what we provide is a unified, integrated experience and brings all of them together. You're going to need all three capabilities. Like if you look at the agentic workflow, there are three conversations or three pathways that have to be protected, governed, and so forth, and observed, I should say. The first is the agent talking to an LLM. That's pathway number one. And this is where an AI gateway would act as the layer of defense. Then you have the agent talking to an MCP server with all the MCP tools and everything behind it. That is the second pathway, which also needs to be governed with its own kind of defense layer. And then the third pathway is the agent talking to an API. And this is where your standard API gateway acts as the layer of defense. So an agentic workflow requires all three of these. You can't just pick one or the other. They're all working together to provide that agentic experience. So if you have three different products providing this, where is the onus on making sure these all integrate and work well together? Is it a common way by which you write the policies? Is it a common way by which you observe those policies? This is where I think the fragmentation just compounds if you do this. And that's why we said there is a better way, and it is a unified, integrated way, as long as the experience is nice and seamless and it's DevOps and platform ops friendly. And that's what we provide. I think this is a unique differentiation that Traefik provides and brings to the table. Everything is as code, its infrastructure is code. You have a CRD for every one of these configurations. You can deploy them through your CI/CD pipeline. It can be fully observed through any third-party platform because we support open telemetry out of the box, logs, metrics, traces. And the policies are all, because it says code, they can be version controlled, they can be updated, they can be collaborated with, shared with other people. So you can invite your SecOps team, your DevOps team, maybe your AI ops team to all collaborate on making sure these policies are consistent and they represent the entire agentic experience.
So what I also heard in there that I don't hear from our grandfathers and fathers gateways is you're selling a gateway to folks who are producing an API, but you talk about a lot about API consumers, and the old guard of gateways really don't care much about consumers. It's like, hey, we publish this and make it available, and you guys just use it and you build it, they will come kind of mentality. But
Yeah.
you talk a lot about the consumer experience in there. And so what role does that play in your guys' thinking here?
I mean, everything starts and stops at the consumer because when infrastructure works great, it is invisible. And so we want the gateway. Obviously, the people configuring and installing and deploying the gateways are DevOps and platform teams, but the consumers are not them. Your API consumers have to be able to consume these APIs or AI and MCP in a very seamless way, and you need to lower the bar for them to be able to understand what they can consume, how they can consume, and for them to start testing and building their agentic workflows or their API workflows. So in the API days, this is pre-AI MCP, you have the notion of a developer portal where you can log into a developer portal based on your identity. You will have access to certain APIs and their documentation. You will have assigned a plan for the rate limits and quotas that you're allowed to do. And then based on that, you can then take that documentation and that instruction set and you can take it to your favorite tool, whether it's a Postman or whether it's a Bruno or something else, where you can then start to test your API workflows. Well, in the AI and the MCP world, it's more complicated than that, right? Especially like let's talk about the agentic world. Who is the consumer? It could be an agent. So you have to think not just about UX, which is the user experience, you have to think about AX, the agentic experience. And how is the agent going to consume and understand what is available to them? And then when something breaks, let's say you have a 429 that happens, how is an agent going to react to that? And what we are seeing now is agents don't react well to these guardrails that stop them from doing what they have to do at the infrastructure layer. So you have to think through that is what is the experience you want, is the message you want to provide to the agents so they're able to gracefully proceed forward rather than ungracefully just kind of crash and burn. So there's a lot of thinking going into this. I mean, MCP as a protocol is also evolving, as you know. AI is more standardized now. Almost every AI endpoint is an API that you can talk to, but the guardrails is where a lot of the nuance comes in is when you stop an agent from doing something, whether it's talking to an LLM and it says something inappropriate that the guardrail blocks, or it tries to make a tool call that it's not supposed to and it gets blocked, what does the agentic experience look like? And this is where we spend a lot of time, and we have solutions today. But this is a fast evolving space, and I think a lot of work has to go in. And back to your point, we have to think about the agentic experience and solve backwards from there.
I like it. And so you mentioned portals, onboarding docs. We'll come back to this in a little bit. A previous episode, it hasn't aired yet, but I talked to the Microsoft Office 365 Copilot API product manager, and he's talking about how they're bundling, the whole portal doc experience as part of that. But I want to come to that in a little bit because uh, there's other things. So this is the consumer side, this is the experience side, this is really shaping the how the gateway, what the gateway is, what the experience is, and being thoughtful about that through policies and governance. But you say guardrails, governance for me is just guidance and how you structure that. But a lot of this is dependent on what's going on inside of these enterprises. And so can you talk to me about the state of the gateway and perspective from your guys when it's a central, you mentioned platform is a centralized platform versus federated. And I just, recently stood up a API governance program at Bloomberg, which was part of a new platform initiative to centralize things. And there's a lot of tribes inside of Bloomberg, and there's a lot of lines of business domains that legally can't talk to each other, buy side and sell side. There's the
Yep.
media group, there's the quants who are just their own, beast. So it's like, how do you see the role of the gateway and what you guys are building when it comes to federated versus centralized kind of platform strategies?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And I mean, in a lot of big companies, you're not going to have an Uber gateway that does everything. However, the principle of centralization still exists. So it's what I would think of and call this is federated centralization, which means like let's take that example, the buy side versus the sell side, they should be separated. But in a buy side, you may have a centralized gateway experience for all the different workflows that exist. On the sell side, you may have a different centralized gateway experience for all of the workflows that they have. They're not talking to each other, but still you want to standardize and centralize when you can, because if you don't, then you are not able to install and observe the policies at a centralized level because then everybody starts to do their own thing. Like, let's say on the buy side, you have five different teams using five different gateways and five different ways of writing policies and enforcing them and observing them. That creates unnecessary chaos. right? So we do believe that there will be lots of gateways or lots of environments in an enterprise. There will be lots of gateway deployments in the enterprise, but that doesn't mean there needs to be a lot of different operating models for those gateways. So if you standardize on the operating model and you create a blueprint on what this architecture looks like, and it's a very portable architecture that you can then apply to many different parts of your organization, because a lot of the things you have been very prescriptive about, which is what is the operating model? Is it infrastructure as code or is it ClickOps? How do you govern? Like, what kind of guardrails do you want to have? And have they been architecturally defined? And then all you're doing is copying and pasting it in multiple different places in your organization. In similar ways where you would deploy in a large enterprise, you may have disconnected sites and you may have non-disconnected sites. The architecture is maybe still the same, but the locations are different. So we believe a great modern gateway, which is the job is governance, it should follow the workloads. It should be placed closer to the workloads in the environments where those workloads are. And there are many types of workloads, so you may have many deployments without creating this fragmentation of the operating model itself.
And then moving back out towards where we were a little bit ago, that applies at the edge, regional, and
Yep.
depending on regulatory and other market-driven aspects, right?
Exactly. Exactly. If you have a cloud native, lightweight gateway that is modular in nature, you can deploy it at the edge, you can deploy it at the core or anywhere in between. And this is one of the things that Traefik really solved for from the very beginning. We became the default ingress controller for K3s, which is optimized for edge deployments. And then we also became de facto ingress for many uh, K8s distros. And we're going to be actually announcing next week at KubeCon where there are additional distributions that are now adopting Traefik to be the default ingress controller. And the reason for that is because we're lightweight and we are cube native and we're very ecosystem friendly, so we can actually be deployed with the same operating model in the edge and also outside of the edge in core environments.
Like it definitely reflects the where things are going, the modernization, the reality of doing this digitally, globally. But now going back to the portal experiences. So our father's gateway, when they figured out REST and all of this, they bundled portals and docs and everything with the gateway to kind of make it visible, make it tangible, kind of this big thing. And then the universe kind of exploded, and some say unbundled, and you started seeing doc providers or just portal providers. And then at Postman, I did my time at Postman, and we would create workspaces, which are very akin to GitHub repos, but then we had a central network as well. And discovery is a messy thing, and there's a lot of friction at portals, and I see a lot of API portal players trying to become everything, putting RBAC control in there, putting SDK generation, and becoming these big things. But I talked to the Office 365 uh, API product manager, and they're starting to, because they put all their learning center into MCP, they're starting to bundle, if you want Office 365, if you want to go after the Microsoft Teams APIs and get chat and messages, and you need the docs for that, that's right there bundled with an MCP as part of
Yep.
MCP, and they're injecting that. So, what is Traffic's approach to just portals and docs and that old school hustle? But then, how are you guys responding to this? I would say.
Yeah, this is also evolving very fast. There are multiple approaches here. Uh, we don't uh, we don't I would say restrict users, the perspective that we take here is there are many places where you can find documentation about an API and what it can do. Now, if Traefik is serving those APIs, we have the home court advantage of being able to auto discover all of the services and APIs that are running because we're Kube native. And architecturally, it gives you that advantage where if I'm sitting inside of a Kubernetes cluster, I'm talking directly to the Kube API, I can auto discover all of the services and the APIs and so forth that are sitting there. So this notion of shadow APIs or ghost APIs kind of goes away. And now the question becomes, okay, which ones are we exposing and how are we exposing them to the outside world? Is there an open API schema uh, tied to it? So we look at it from that perspective is our job is to be able to standardize the exposure and the security of all those APIs that we are serving. So documentation becomes a byproduct of the approach that we take. Now, we are not serving all APIs, obviously, but we also have this feature where if an API is sitting externally somewhere, you could configure a service inside of Kubernetes, and we'll call it external URLs, that you can point to the others and we'll discover them. So there is a way to centralize the discovery and the documentation of all APIs. But we recognize that we're not going to sit in front of all APIs in an enterprise. So therefore, there is going to be this fragmentation of documentation that may exist, in one place or the other. But as far as the ones we manage, we can simplify that process. And then after that, it just becomes a matter of governance, which is policies are there, they're enforced at real time, and you get to observe everything that's happening.
I think it's I mean, you guys are just as the pipes fade into the background, it's not that people don't care about electricity and plumbing and the things, they just work.
Yep.
As the gateway kind of does that, I think you guys are taking a pragmatic approach to just what's needed, let alone, I mean, not paying towards the hype around documentation and portals and kind of what's being sold, just like what are people needing. And I would say, so in my head, I put the gateway kind of evolution as there was the SOA, which I firmly put 2000 to 2010. There was kind of our the next iteration, 2000, roughly 2010 through 2015. Then there was a new, the Kong and Tyke and those 2015 through 2020, which you guys are part of, I think, but I considered you guys the bleeding edge of that they were leading edge at that moment. Now you guys are the leading edge. You guys are just like pragmatic, responding what's out there, what people need. You guys are kind of baked in. Um, what's next with AI? Like, what's the future hold? Like, where's your guys' head at as far as what's the bleeding edge?
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do. I think just to keep up with everything that's happening in the AI and the agentic world, just today is like day 3 or day 4 actually at NVIDIA GTC. It is very clear coming out of this event that governance is the new constraint for enterprises to be able to put AI in production and scale it. So this is kind of like the almost like the coming to Jesus moment that's happening right now. Compute is always going to be a constraint for AI, just because you need GPUs, you need power and all that. But governance is the next frontier. So I think we're very excited about that because as I was saying at the beginning of this, the number one job of a gateway is good governance. And it's going to be all about day two ops, is how do you create a wonderful operating experience for the kind of infrastructure that we provide, both for humans but also for agents to be able to spin up an infrastructure on demand, be able to enforce the policies, everything as code, be able to observe what's happening. And I think this is where the world is shifting with the right guardrails. And I think the guardrails is going to be a key part of this next, whether you want to call it bleeding edge. I don't think we're a little more mature than that as an industry, but still, there's a lot more work that needs to be done on the guardrails, making them more efficient. Because with that, with security, there's always this, it's a push and pull kind of a force, right? The two opposing forces is how do you go fast and how do you go safe? And safety and speed have always been kind of these two opposing forces. And I think for AI, that's the balance that everybody will have to figure out is what is an acceptable speed safety ratio? And infrastructure like what we provide plays a big role. Obviously, the guardrail providers and the technologies around that also play a big role. And where we see our kind of contribution in this is we're not in the guardrail creation business. We want to provide a composable gateway pipeline that allows best of breed guardrails to be stitched together based on what the customer wants, however you want to compose them and provide that seamless experience. And what do I mean by guardrails? If I double click on some of them, we just launched this earlier this week. Now we provide guardrails across the spectrum from deterministic guardrails to probabilistic guardrails. For deterministic guardrails, this is a regex guard that customers can write their own regex rules for well understood data patterns. Like, for example, if you want to guardrail against social security numbers, we understand that pattern very well. 3 digits plus 2 digits plus 4 digits. Or a credit card number, you have 16 digits, 4444. Or if you have a CVV, So, and this is not just US, you can also expand this to be international because you understand the data patterns. And you can use RegexGuard is very effective at that and is very deterministic with the lowest latency. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum semantic guards. This is where you need to understand what is actually being done. And we have done integration with the NVIDIA safety NIMs, with the IBM Granite guardrails, and with Microsoft Presidio guardrails. And there's going more coming because there are other vendors that also provide guardrails. So be able to bring all of these into the pipeline, and then the customer decides which guardrails do they need. And that going back to that speed to safety ratio, what are they optimizing for? What is acceptable risk versus the speed that they want to move at? And so that's what I think the next frontier is everybody's going to try to figure out for themselves which guardrails they want to put in for what use cases and so forth.
I like it. I like it, and I think that that gets to one of the reasons I was stoked to talk to you is because I'm building a startup called Navtico, and I think I want to help bring some of those guardrails, and is what, and we can talk about that another time. We're at 30 minutes or 35 minutes, so I always try to do a check-in, and I dove right in. I didn't even explain to you what the hell I'm doing here. These are I have Tuesday 10 a.m. Eastern, and this is our Thursday 1 p.m. Eastern, and I have these live sessions. And sometimes I get people here to speak, sometimes I don't. Depends on schedules. But then I carve it the best of it and make podcasts out of it, and I publish those twice a week. And so, but we do have guests because this is a live webinar. I have David Bisak who shows up to almost everyone. He's kind of a groupie. If you need top tier API talent, David's your man. Definitely talk to David. I don't know Jacob, but welcome, Jacob. And so I've got lots more questions I'd love to dive in. I don't expect you to stick around for another half hour if you ain't got time, but also want to open up if you got any questions for me before I dive in more, anything I can share with you.
That's a question for me, right?
Yeah, for you. Yeah. Well, and
Um,
you and the guests, you guys are welcome to ask questions too. David knows that, but Jacob, you're welcome to ask questions in chat, or raise your hand.
I would love to get your take as well, Kin. Where do you see the industry headed in terms of gateways? And given we have these different personalities to the gateways, you have the API gateway, you have the AI and the MCP. Kind of where do you see all of this headed?
Yeah, I mean, I think the gateway is just going to fade back into the wall, the pipes, it's the plumbing, it's critical infrastructure. A small group of people are going to care about it. I think we keep coming up with new ways to invest in and get people excited about it. We kind of need to stop doing that and just start, I think, focusing on the business purposes and outcomes like you talk about. Um, I think what you spoke of, the edge, I think GitOps is an important layer. Get, the edge regionally, because of certain, political climates in the world right now and sovereign kind of concerns. I think regions and then edge being closer to your customer really matters. But I think a GitOps kind of approach to that is super important right now. I don't think they should be massive appliances. I'm not always convinced they should be centralized. And I think, but I don't always feel like Federation solves their problems either. So I'm not like going to jump on the Federation train either. Um, I think the future really is, I agree with you 100% guardrails, but they've got to be bridges to business alignment, product alignment. And that's kind of why I left Postman, is I was doing the Breaking Changes podcast at Postman, and I would take the transcripts and go through all the topics. This is before ChatGPT. I did it had scripts and did it manually. But what are the top topics of each conversation, each enterprise? And I was talking to like 7-Eleven and NBA and Disney and really interesting ones. And the top two things were governance and products, excuse me. So treating APIs as a products and ideally both. And
Yep.
so when my time was up there and I left, I looked up who's doing it, and that's why I ended up at Bloomberg. And so that product alignment, which I saw some of the downsides of centralized platformatization. I would say not everyone's ready for that, especially when you've got a 40, 50-year-old company with lots of tribes. Like not everyone gets along and is or because of history. There's a lot of things going on. So I think we got to get creative with the guardrails and the policies from a business outcome product standpoint. We got to stop talking about the gateway, even the APIs, and I'm the API evangelist. That's my identity. We got to talk about capabilities. We got to talk about business outcomes, and then how do those gateways, how do those proxies, how does Edge, how does documentation, portal, MCP, all these things backfill and get us there. And
Yep.
so I guess one question back at you is, uh, and I just saw Daniel, my friend Daniel, pop in. What is a capability from your vantage point when it comes to you? I've heard you say it several times in several contexts. Like in the context of this moment, the intersection of gateways and AI and APIs, what's a capability? What does that mean?
Uh, Tell me more. What do you mean by what's a capability?
Like when you so when you use the word, you call something, a gateway capability. What do you mean by what a gateway capability is? What is it? Is it a bundle of policies? Is it, what constitutes a
Got it.
capability?
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. It's so let's go back to kind of the job of the gateway is governance. And the governance is the how rich of a policy can you write? How can you enforce them in real time? And how can you observe them? So what you're asking is like, what do these policies mean? Like, what are we talking about, right? So a policy could be, and let's say the gateway has these three different personalities, an API gateway, AI gateway, MCP gateway. So the policies are different because they're different domains. There are some basic policies that you would need around routing. For example, let's start with the API itself. Rate limiting would be a policy. Quota would be a policy. Identity that you are able to extract the identity from, let's say, a JOT token and say this person can only access this API or these group of APIs. That's a policy. So this in the world of API gateway, these would be some simple policies. Now, WAF is becoming an increasingly hot topic for API gateways. WAF becomes a policy engine under which you may write a SQL injection detection policy, a cross-site scripting policy. So these would be kind of, I'm just giving you some broad stroke examples here, but this is in the world of API, these would be the policy. Now let's jump to AI. The types of policies are going to build on top of what we already talked about in API, but now it gets more specific to the world of AI. What are the endpoints? How are you routing to those endpoints? Is it an OpenAI API compliant API? Is it a responses API versus a chat completion API? And then these guardrails come in. So let's take regex guard. That would be a policy that you would write that says a user trying to talk to an LLM endpoint needs to go through this guardrail, this regex guard guardrail first. So think of it as a chain of policies that you're effectively chaining them together. You're saying do this first, then do this, then do this. So regex guard becomes one policy. After that, you say, let's take it through the NVIDIA name the topic control guardrail that says, I want to make sure that this content that's in this prompt is actually allowed based on my business policy. So let's say if it's a sales agent that is, that's been configured to talk to an LLM, and somebody asks the sales agent a legal question, without the guardrail, agent's going to answer everything because it has full power and full agency by definition. But you want to do two things. One is you want to stop the question from even getting to the agent, or if the agent does get the response back from the LLM, you want to stop that. So that would be another policy that you would write, which is a topic control policy. Now let's go to MCP. There, the policies are different. First policy would be, what tools do you have access to? Can you make this tool call? Now, you don't want to stop there. Once you make the tool call, what can you now do with it? Let's say it's a finance agent making a tool call to authorize a transaction. So you've given the finance agent the ability to access the authorization tool call. But does that mean it should be able to authorize everything and anything, regardless of the dollar value? That could be an additional policy that says this finance agent only has authorization for approvals up to a certain amount. So all these become policies, and that's what I said. The number one job is governance, and within governance, the number one job is to be able to write and enforce rich, granular policies. And then you stack these up, they become your policy kind of code base. You enforce them and you observe them.
Okay, you're heading in exactly the direction. I would say, the bundling of those policies are how you start building these bridges into these different groups and and from engineering to product, and then all the way up the chain. Those bundles, they become derivatives or abstractions that you can then sell to leadership for
Exactly.
different purposes. So at that highest level, you're sitting with you're at a dinner at a conference or something, and you're talking to this, CTO of a large enterprise, or even CEO. How do you sell traffic? Like, how do you explain what you guys do when it comes to, those capabilities, those abstractions?
It comes down to runtime governance and how important is runtime governance for you guys. Do you have the right policies in place to ensure that your APIs are behaving the way they should? And especially with AI and MCP, do you have the right governance layer to allow the right conversations to happen and the right kind of business workflows to take place in an agentic experience. I mean, ultimately it comes down to that. Like every CEO, CTO, they want to have rules. Where are they writing and enforcing the rules? And do they have a way to do that at scale? And if they don't, then they're flying blind and it just takes one incident and then this bubbles up as a boardroom discussion.
Yeah, I like it. Pause again, since Daniel and Jacob joined. You guys are feel free to raise your hand, ask questions. Otherwise I'll just keep asking questions and dominate the time here. So you mentioned observability several times, and I'm not just talking platform or engineering, but observability all the way up to the senior leadership and the C-suite. When you guys when traffic delivers observability, where is that? Where does that go? Is that existing observability tools, open source? Where does that go?
Because we speak native open telemetry, it goes into whatever existing open telemetry collector and visualization tool that an enterprise might already have. Outside of OpenTelemetry, we also connect with like the Datadogs of the world, the Splunks of the world. But more and more, what we are seeing is that OpenTelemetry is becoming kind of like the standard. So we have done even deeper integrations with companies like Dash Zero. I think they're kind of on the leading edge of providing a much more modern experience for being able to really kind of find what we call the signal in the noise. So different platforms have different strengths, but the base data is open telemetry. And then that goes into these platforms, and then whatever visualization you want to do for the audience, whether it's a C-suite, you may have a different visualization for them versus the operators. They may have a more deeper layer that they want to observe. So we don't get in the middle of that. What we are doing is providing the rich telemetry that's coming out of our gateways, across these three disciplines: API, AI, MCP.
Yeah, important observability, important kind of playing or finding your role, your space in the existing infrastructure, and not just always wanting to be the next cloud platform where your customers have to go to get things done.
Yep.
You're allowing people to build their platform. And that's always been a frustration of mine, is whose platform are we developing here when it comes to some of these conversations? Are we building our customers' platform? Are we building our platforms? Are we
Right.
building Google's platform? There's Facebook's, there's a lot of sleight of hand. I think that occurs there sometimes as far as how people. So how and in that light, one way I judge platforms, and I know the answers to a lot of these, but I'm going to ask anyways, is, I always judge API people who are selling API services and tools by their own, how much they practice what they preach. So how do what are the integration opportunities when it comes to traffic as far as API, other things? How can I automate and integrate with you guys?
Yeah, so because we're Cube native, if you are already integrating with Cube, you can integrate with us. You can also use Terraform to spin us up. I mean, we're a Docker container essentially. And we actually work in VMs, in containers equally as well.
Mhm.
So with a VM, you can essentially spin us up inside a Linux, let's say, distro, and be able to supply a cloud init configuration. And then you can spin us up, everything pre-configured. With Kubernetes, it becomes even easier. Spin us up as a container, supply the YAML files, and then you have a working configuration in a matter of minutes. And one last thing I would say is we are location agnostic, we are deployment agnostic as well, and we're Kubernetes agnostic. So we have customers using us in AKS, EKS, GKE, RKE, LKE, and many other kube distros, the same binary being used across all these different environments. That means you can have a unified, consistent policy layer that follows the workloads wherever it gets deployed. We even have the neoclouds that are using us, our open source, as part of their Kubernetes stack.
Like it. That's the stack I'm looking for. As I mean, we're just about to release alpha of our of Navtico, and our we're open source, just a container. But we're looking for, how do we we're not a gateway. How do we how do we allow for, because we want to power capabilities in a container and bring your own gateway, and we'll expose, but we're in the business of governing and transforming and policies as well. So I want to understand how that, because there's definitely some overlap between, I would say, what we want to do from a policy end, but from a gateway, you guys are definitely much larger and of a footprint and more technical than I think what we're shooting for. Where we're gonna try to connect the dots is at what we call the fabric level. So our framework's open source, containerized, similar to what you guys are doing, but we want to connect the dots in new and interesting ways across the no matter where you're deploying, what you're doing, and then try to align things with business outcomes. And really, I would say even go one step further than the policies is, how does this translate into everyday business speak, so people can just chat with their Copilot, Office 360 Copilot, and have it be deploying, deprecating, doing things with APIs that they're unaware of, and with a focus on third party APIs and kind of external APIs, is how do I actually leverage my Figma implementation. And so we're less producer side, we're consumer side, really, but there's definitely overlap between, I think, what we're trying to do. But I think I can be a guardrail partner once we get, past alpha and beta here. But I got a lot more learning about what you guys offer, and before I think we're ready. So
Awesome, awesome. I'll leave you guys with a ebook we just